UFC 300 Pereira vs. Hill, one of the most stacked cards ever, is this Saturday, and for each fight, including the prelims, I'm going to compare stats, review recent fight history, analyze the results for each of my 7 data science prediction models, give a combined weighted prediction of those models, and then give my final prediction, which considers both quantitative and qualitative information combined. Later this week, I'll also upload a video covering promising underdogs and inexpensive favorites to highlight some opportunities for you all. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, and find some value bets, or just for entertainment and information to prepare for this upcoming event. Please like and subscribe if you find this interesting, informative, or helpful, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me through that. Definitely not required, but it would be very much appreciated. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, charts and graphs, and updating the site takes hours every day and week, so I'd really appreciate any support. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. I can't believe I'm at 540 subscribers. It truly means the world to me that we can all share our passion for MMA and continue building this community together. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. We start the card off with Deiveson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt, which feels insane to even say. Let's go ahead and take a look at their stats. Deiveson Figueiredo stands at 5 feet 5 inches tall, while Cody Garbrandt is a bit taller at 5 feet 8 inches. Figueiredo is the older of the two fighters at 36 years of age, 4 years older than Garbrandt, who's 32. Figueiredo also has a slight reach advantage with 68 inches over Garbrandt's 65. When we dive into their in-match statistics, Figueiredo throws slightly more significant strikes per minute at 3.08 compared to Garbrandt's 3.06. And Garbrandt has a lower striking accuracy of 40% versus Figueiredo's 55%. Garbrandt absorbs more significant strikes per minute at 3.91, which is higher than Figueiredo's 3.46. Interestingly, Garbrandt shows better striking defense at 60% compared to Figueiredo's 51%. In the grappling department, Figueiredo averages more takedowns with 1.65 per 15 minutes against Garbrandt's 1.1. However, Garbrandt has an impressive takedown defense at 80%, which significantly surpasses Figueiredo's 58%, but I think that's more of a reflection of who Figueiredo has faced versus Garbrandt. Figueiredo has faced better grapplers, and with a high submission average of 1.6, it's clear that Figueiredo is a more active grappler, contrasting with Garbrandt's lack of submission average. Now let's go ahead and check out how Deiveson Figueiredo has performed in his most recent fights. Figueiredo's last 5 fights show a mixed bag, with a recent win against Rob Font where he landed 4 takedowns on top of 45 strikes, which was similar to Font's output. Now prior to that fight, he had a series of wars against Brandon Moreno, losing to him twice, once by KO/TKO and once by rear naked choke submission. Between the 2 losses, he managed to defeat Moreno via a unanimous decision. Now prior to his first loss against Moreno, there was a majority decision draw between the two. If you want to see high-level MMA and a technical battle, or you're just new to the sport and you want to see what the hype is all about, I highly recommend you watch a Moreno versus Figueiredo fight. Now prior to those championship fights against Moreno, Figueiredo also had championship fights against Alex Perez and had 2 fights against Joseph Benavidez prior to that, all 3 of which he won. He's been tested time and time again and has only failed a very few number of times. His record is 22 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. 9 of his wins are from KO/TKOs, and 8 of his wins are from submissions. We're looking at one of the best fighters in the flyweight division ever, and the fact that this card kicks off with him truly speaks to how good this entire card is. Now let's check out how his opponent, Cody Garbrandt, has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Garbrandt's recent fight history also presents a mixed record, but recently his momentum has changed for the better. If you're a Garbrandt fan, you know it was a rough patch from 2017 through 2021. There was so much potential behind Garbrandt as he defeated the likes of Marcus Brimage, Augusto Mendes, Thomas Almeida, and Mizugaki, all via KO/TKO. Then he faced Dominic Cruz, which really put him on the map because of his style and his aura. He was dancing in the octagon while outclassing Cruz. I also highly recommend you all going back and watching the Cruz and Garbrandt fight. Then TJ Dillashaw happened. Dillashaw defeated Garbrandt twice via KO/TKO in 2017 and 2018, and you could tell those losses weighed very heavily on him and absolutely crushed him. Then he lost via KO/TKO to Pedro Munoz back in 2019. He took a little over a year off and then came back, defeating Rafael Asuncao via KO/TKO, which gave fans some hope, only to then lose to Rob Font and Kai Kara France by unanimous decision and KO/TKO respectively. But recently, things have changed for Garbrandt for the better. He defeated Trevin Jones by unanimous decision at UFC 285 and then defeated Brian Kelleher via KO/TKO in December of 2023 at UFC 296. His total record still isn't bad, all things considered. He has 14 wins and 5 losses, and 11 of his wins are via KO/TKO. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. When I run these two fighters through my 7 prediction models, 5 of the models pick Figueiredo and 2 pick Garbrandt by a narrow margin. When we weigh the prediction models together to get a weighted probability, the result is a 61% probability for Deiveson Figueiredo. The models are picking up on Figueiredo's well-rounded game, his striking advantages, his grappling skills, and his recent fight history. My final prediction, which is slightly higher than the weighted predictions, is that Deiveson Figueiredo has a 69% probability of defeating Cody Garbrandt. The reason I bumped it up is because of the caliber of opponents that Figueiredo has fought and been tested on and passed his tests with compared to Garbrandt. Garbrandt had to face easier opponents as he started dropping in value due to his losses, which then drove him to catch a couple wins. No disrespect, but it feels like these two are on different tiers within this division, and you can see it when you watch Figueiredo's fights compared to Garbrandt's fights. Figueiredo is a technical artist, whereas Garbrandt sometimes swings heavily and throws haymakers, hoping to connect and just finish the fight. I think Figueiredo can read those wild shots. He's just too experienced. I think Figueiredo gets the KO/TKO here and wears down Garbrandt into the second and third round, to then increase his volume and look for the finishing series of blows. He could also wear him down and submit him. Regardless, I don't see this going to the judges. In the next fight, we have Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. This fight is historic because Jim Miller has been on UFC 100, UFC 200, and now thankfully we'll get to see him on UFC 300. Let's go ahead and take a look at their stats. Bobby Green is 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches, while Jim Miller is a bit shorter at 5 feet 8 inches with the same reach of 71 inches. At 37 years old, Green is 3 years younger than Miller, who's 40. Green's significant strikes per minute are impressive at 6.14 compared to Miller's 2.96, so he likes to throw volume. He keeps his hands low and he boldly leans in with his head towards his opponent to draw them in, only to then counter quickly and land his shots. By keeping his hands low, he throws quick flicker-style jabs that connect and wear down his opponents. His head movement is also notable, which is why he has a good striking defense at 62%. Understanding how these fighters move within the octagon really highlights why their stats are the way they are, which is why I love data. These numbers tell a story and I love painting it for you all. Green also has a higher striking accuracy at 52%, while Miller's is at 42%. Miller absorbs fewer significant strikes per minute at 3.18 compared to Green's 3.74. In terms of defense, Miller has a 58% striking defense, which is lower than Green. Looking at their grappling stats, Miller attempts more takedowns on average with 1.58 attempts against Green's 1.2. However, Green's takedown defense is better at 74% compared to Miller's 48%. Now in submissions, Miller is more dangerous with a 1.7 average, which towers over Green's 0.3. Now let's check out how Bobby Green has performed in his most recent fights. Green's record shows a series of ups and downs. Let's start with his overall record. He's an experienced fighter with 31 wins, 15 losses, and 1 draw. 11 of his wins are via KO/TKO, and 9 of his wins are via submission. 5 of his losses are via KO/TKO, and 2 of his losses are via submission. He's coming off of a loss to Jalin Turner, in which he was finished in round 1 via KO/TKO, and he took a few extra shots that the ref should have prevented. Now, prior to that, he had 2 wins, a KO/TKO against Grant Dawson, and an arm triangle submission against Tony El Kukui Ferguson. He had a no count against Jared Gordon prior to that due to an accidental illegal headbutt. He lost to Drew Dober prior to that via KO/TKO. Now, Bobby Green is fun to watch, but he's kinda inconsistent. The last time he won 3 fights in a row was back in 2020, and since then he's had a checkered record. At one point in his career, he did go on an 8-fight win streak, but that was all the way back in 2011 and 2014. Now let's check out how his opponent, Jim Miller, has performed in his most recent fights. Jim Miller is another very experienced fighter with a total record of 37 wins and 17 losses. The crazy thing is 20 of his wins are actually from submissions, and 7 are from KO/TKOs. He's been finished 5 times, 2 of which were KO/TKOs, and 3 of which were submissions. He's done well recently. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of 2 wins, both of which were finishes against Gabriel Benitez and Jesse Butler. His most recent loss was to Alexander Hernandez early in 2023 via unanimous decision. He has wins against Cowboy Donald Cerrone, Nicholas Mata, and Clay Guida, and has faced good competition and got great experience out of those fights. He's faced Charles Oliveira and Dan Hooker back in 2018, Anthony Showtime Pettis and Dustin Poirier back in 2017, and even Beneil Dariush in 2015. Now I know what you might be thinking. MMA Data Guy, he's lost all of those fights. But what I'd say to that is experience is equivalent to gold in MMA. Each loss is a lesson and you get more comfortable as you face different types of fighters. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 6 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Bobby Green in this fight, although they're not too confident. When we weigh the models together, we're left with a 53% probability for Green to win and a 47% probability for Miller to win. My final prediction, which is higher than the weighted predictions, is that Bobby Green has a 60% probability of defeating Jim Miller, and I'll tell you why. We know Jim Miller likes to grapple. Bobby Green has a 74% takedown defense. We know Jim Miller doesn't land very frequently, but Bobby does. He lands more than double, at a higher accuracy, and has better defense. We also know Bobby is 37, whereas Jim is 40. And I know 3 years doesn't sound like a lot, but in MMA, the difference between 37 and 40 is exponential. Now, I know Jim Miller is a people's favorite. We all respect and love the guy, but I'm going off of logic here. Bobby Green should win this fight. Emotions aside, this is more likely Green's fight to win. Now, I don't think he finishes Miller. Miller has a decent strike defense game, so I think this one will go to the judges. I could see some scrambling early on in the fight, as Miller will attempt to grapple Green, but I think Green will pop back up and continue to outstrike him. Miller could capitalize early if he controls Green, or later in the fight if he's persistent and keeps the striking defense sharp and keeps his range. Again, he has the same reach at 71 inches, so those are things to consider if you're looking to bet on this fight. If I was picking by emotion, I would go for Jim Miller and root for his win, because he's been on UFC 100, 200, and 300, he's a fan favorite, we all love the guy. So if you want to go with your heart, go for Miller. But if you want to go with your mind, go for Green. In the next fight, we have Jessica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez. Let's take a look at their stats. Jessica Andrade stands at 5 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 62 inches, and Marina Rodriguez stands at 5 feet 6 inches tall with a 65 inch reach, giving Rodriguez a notable height and reach advantage. Andrade, however, shows a higher strikes landed per minute rate at 6.67 compared to Rodriguez's 4.77. She also has a higher striking accuracy at 50% versus Rodriguez's 48%. However, when it comes to strikes absorbed per minute, Andrade absorbs almost twice as many. Both have a striking defense at over 50%, with Rodriguez's being 2% higher at 56%. Andrade's grappling is better than Rodriguez across the board. Her takedown average is significantly higher than Rodriguez at 2.45 compared to 0.25. Takedown accuracy and takedown defense percentage are also advantages that Andrade holds. Her takedown accuracy is 10% better at 54%, and her takedown defense is 6% better at 72%. Both have a relatively low submission average, but Andrade has that advantage as well. Now let's check out how former women's strawweight champion Jessica Andrade has performed in her most recent UFC fights. She's coming off of a win against Mackenzie Dern, which was via KO/TKO. Prior to that, she had a rough patch, losing and being finished in 3 fights against Tatiana Suarez, Jan, and Erin Blanchfield. She was submitted twice and KO/TKO'd by Jan. Prior to that, she defeated Lauren Murphy via unanimous decision. And if you haven't noticed yet, all of these fights were in 2023. She's been insanely active, which, like I said earlier, means she has a lot of experience and is very comfortable inside the octagon against several different types of opponents, even if she's faced a few losses. She's also defeated the likes of Amanda Lemos, Cynthia Calvillo, Caitlin Sermonaro, who was previously Caitlin Chikugian, if that sounds unfamiliar, Rose Namajunas, Angela Hill, and Raquel Pennington. I mean, the list goes on and on. She has an impressive resume. She's also faced Valentina Shevchenko, Zhang Weili, Joanna Jacek, and Jennifer Maia. And even though those were fights she lost, she's still clearly one of the top women's strawweight fighters. She's ranked number 4 in her division and number 11 in the pound-for-pound rankings. Now let's check out how her opponent, Marina Rodriguez, has performed in her most recent UFC fights. She's won 3 of her last 5 fights, defeating Michelle Waterson-Gomez via KO/TKO and decision, and Jan and Mackenzie Dern via decision. Her recent losses were to Verna Jandiroba, who we recently saw fight, and Amanda Lemos via unanimous decision and KO/TKO respectively. Although her resume isn't as stacked, she's still a promising fighter who has the ability to drop her opponents or control the fight and take it to the distance. She's ranked number 6 in the women's strawweight division. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 5 out of 7 prediction models lean towards Marina Rodriguez in this fight, which is interesting. When you weigh the models together, you're left with a 57% probability that Rodriguez defeats Andrade. When it comes to forming my final prediction, I decided to knock that down some because I don't think the models can pick up on the talent or complexity of former opponents. Andrade has a great resume, and I have to give her some credit where it's due. So my final prediction is that Marina Rodriguez has a narrow 51% probability of defeating Jessica Andrade due to her reach advantage, striking defense, and her lower absorption rate. I don't think she finishes Andrade because most of her fights go the distance and she tends to control fights, so this one will likely go to the judges. I think there's value here if you want to go for the underdog. I'll break down why in my Promising Underdogs and Best Favorites video, which you should absolutely check out because it's short, sweet, and to the point, and it gives you all opportunities. So subscribe if you haven't already. That video is going to come out very soon after this one. In the next fight, we have Jalin Turner versus Renato Moicano. Let's go ahead and take a look at their stats. Jalin Turner stands tall at 6 feet 3 inches with a reach of 77 inches, towering over Renato Moicano, who is only 5 feet 11 inches with a 72-inch reach. Turner's stats highlight his high-volume fighting style with an impressive 6.02 strikes landed per minute and a striking accuracy of 48%. Moicano's strikes landed per minute is lower at 4.41 with a similar striking accuracy at 47%. What stands out is Moicano's significantly higher striking defense at 60% compared to Turner's 41%, which is a 19% difference. Turner shows a higher strikes absorbed per minute rate, but that's understandable because of his higher output. Looking at the grappling stats, Moicano doubles Turner's takedown average, but his takedown accuracy is 47% compared to Turner's 55%. Both fighters have similar takedown defense, with Turner at 75% and Moicano at 72%. Turner has a higher submission average at 1.2, while Moicano has a 0.6 submission average. Now let's check out how Jalin Turner has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Turner has won 3 of his last 5 fights, defeating Bobby Green and Jamie Mullarkey via KO/TKO and submitting Brad Riddell via guillotine choke. He's coming off of a win against Green. However, prior to that, he's lost twice against Dan Hooker and Mateusz Gamrot, but to be fair, both of those were split decisions. His total record is mixed with 14 wins and 7 losses. 10 of his wins were via KO/TKO and 4 of his wins were via submission. He's been finished 3 times out of his 7 losses, and all 3 were via KO/TKO. He's ranked number 10 in the lightweight division, and 7 of his wins were within 1 minute and 40 seconds. Now let's check out how his opponent, Renato Moicano, has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Moicano also has momentum on his side, winning 4 of his last 5 fights, defeating Drew Dober via unanimous decision, and submitting Brad Riddell, Alexander Hernandez, and Jay Herbert. Now, he did lose a few fights ago to former champ Rafael Dos Anjos, but RDA is an absolute beast. If anything, that strengthened Turner by giving him 5 important rounds of experience. He's also faced Rafael Fiziev, Jose Aldo, and Brian Ortega, but he lost to all 3 of them. Now, he's defeated Cub Swanson, Calvin Kattar, and Jeremy Stevens, and his total record is 18 wins and 5 losses. 10 of his wins were via submission, and he hasn't gotten any KO/TKO victories. He's been finished in 4 out of his 5 total losses, 3 of which were via KO/TKO, and 1 of which was a submission loss, which was to Brian Ortega, of course. Moicano is also ranked number 13 and has 4 first-round finishes. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 5 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Jalin Turner, but the readings are kind of flat. One of the models heavily leans towards Moicano. When you weigh the models together, they actually come out very flat, giving Moicano a very slight advantage. We're talking hundredths of a decimal. I'm going the opposite direction here, and I'm giving Turner a lot more confidence, giving him a 61% probability of victory. Turner is 6 years younger. He has a 5-inch reach advantage, a 4-inch height advantage. He lands more volume. He utilizes his range. He has some grappling defense to try to protect himself against Moicano's grappling efforts. Logically, this is his fight to win. You could argue that Turner has more meaningful experience too. With all of those advantages and seeing Turner's fighting style and knowing most of Moicano's losses are from finishes via KO/TKO, I think Turner drops him in this fight. Turner wins his fight via KO/TKO. In the next fight, we have Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. Let's take a look at their stats. Sodiq Yusuff stands at 5 feet 9 inches tall, slightly shorter than Diego Lopes, who is 5 feet 11 inches. Yusuff is older by 1 year, at 30 years old, compared to Lopes, who's 29 years old. Reach is almost a wash here, with Yusuff at 71 inches and Lopes having just 1 inch more. Yusuff outstrikes Lopes with a higher strikes landed per minute at 5.72 against Lopes' 2.47, which is more than double. He also absorbs fewer strikes per minute, which can be a crucial factor in a stand-up battle because it's a huge advantage when a fighter can land more strikes while absorbing less strikes than his opponent. Both have comparable striking accuracy, but Lopes leads slightly with a 4% advantage. Notably, Yusuff's striking defense is more effective than Lopes's, potentially giving him an edge in striking exchanges. Lopes shines when it comes to submissions, with a 5.3 submission average compared to only 0.4 from Yusuff. Now let's check out how Sodiq Yusuff has performed in his most recent UFC fights. He's coming off of a loss to the talented Edson Barboza. Prior to that fight, he submitted Don Shainas via guillotine choke and got a unanimous decision win against Aleksandar. Prior to that, he lost to Arnold Allen via unanimous decision. And lastly, prior to that fight, he was on a 6-fight win streak. His total record is 13 wins and 3 losses, and 6 of his wins were via KO/TKO, while 1 was via submission, and the remaining 6 were decisions. 2 of his losses were via decision, and 1 was via KO/TKO. He is ranked number 13 in the featherweight division, and he has 5 first-round finishes. Now let's check out how his opponent, Diego Lopes, has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Lopes is coming off of 2 wins, a KO/TKO against Pat Sabatini and a submission win against Gavin Tucker. Now prior to that, he lost to Movsar Evloev, and prior to that, he had 3 fights outside of the UFC following his Dana White Contender Series loss against Joe Anderson Brito. Between that fight and his fight with Evloev, he won 2 fights via KO/TKO against Angel Rodriguez in Lux Fight League and against Kenneth Glenn from Fury FC, but he lost to champion Nate Richardson via split decision. Now going back before his Brito fight at Dana White's Contender Series, he was on a 7-fight win streak in Lux Fight League. Let's zoom out a bit more. His total record is 23 wins and 6 losses. 9 of his wins are via KO/TKO, and an impressive 12 of his wins are via submission. That means he's finished 21 out of 23 wins. That's insane. He is unranked, but he's caught the attention of MMA fans with his interesting hairstyle and his crazy finishing ability. In fact, he has 14 first-round finishes. So let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 6 out of 7 prediction models lean towards Sodiq Yusuff, with only the neural network model leaning towards Diego Lopes at 71%. And when we weigh all of the models together, they give Yusuff a 55% probability to win. I can't agree with that. I have to respect Diego Lopes' skills and his recent momentum. He's fun to watch, and he somehow manages to get the job done and come out with the win, even in fights where he has to make a comeback to do so. I think Yusuff will win this fight, but with a very narrow margin of probability, so I'm giving Sodiq Yusuff a 51% probability of victory. Now, the reason I lean towards Yusuff in this fight is because he lands more volume, he's been tested more than Lopes as well. If Lopes pulls off an upset here, it would be impressive and get him ranked. I'm not saying he's incapable of getting it done. In fact, I'm probably going to feature him on my Promising Underdogs video because I believe he does hold value as an underdog. In the next fight, we have Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison. Let's take a look at their stats. Holly Holm and Kayla Harrison both stand at 5 feet 8 inches tall. Holm is a veteran of the sport. She's 42 years old, which is a significant age difference here compared to Harrison, who's 33. When it comes to reach, Holm extends a 3-inch reach advantage with 69 inches over Harrison's 66 inches. Now, in terms of strikes, Holm lands an average of 3.21 significant strikes per minute with a striking accuracy of 40%. She absorbs 2.79 strikes per minute, and she's able to defend 56% of strikes thrown at her. Her takedown average is 0.9 and at a low accuracy of 30%, but her takedown defense has been 78%. She has a negligible 0.1 submission average, but if you've seen any of her fights, you know she's a striker and she likes to keep it standing. Now, we don't have stats on Kayla Harrison, but we do have information about her fighting record, which I'll review in this next section. First, let's check out how Holly Holm has performed in her most recent UFC fights. Holm has a bit of a mixed record. Let's start out at a macro view. She has 15 wins and 6 losses, with 8 of her wins coming via KO/TKO. She's been finished twice out of her 6 losses, one of which was by submission, and one of which was by KO/TKO. Recently, she's coming off of a draw against Mayra Bueno Silva, which was back in mid-2023. Recently, she's defeated Yana Santos, Irene Aldana, and Raquel Pennington, which was all via unanimous decision. But the Raquel Pennington fight is a bit old. It goes back to January 2020. She lost to Ketlin Vieira back in May 2022 via split decision, and prior to that, she lost to the champ Amanda Nunes on July 2019. Now, she wasn't really active from 2018 through 2022, honestly, but she fought twice in 2023, and she's ranked number 5 in the women's bantamweight division. In her boxing career, she was the top of the pound-for-pound list for most of her career. She has good experience, but age is kind of working against her here. Now let's check out how her opponent, Kayla Harrison, who's making her debut, has performed in her most recent MMA fights. Harrison's record is impressive, I'm not going to lie. She has 16 wins and only 1 loss, and that 1 loss was to Larissa Pacheco in a rematch for the PFL Championship. Most of her fights, in fact all of them but one, were at PFL. The one other fight was at Invicta FC. 6 of her 16 wins are via KO/TKO, and 6 are via submissions. She fights out of American Top Team and has an impressive 9 first-round finishes. She's defeated the likes of Aspen Ladd, Caitlin Young, and of course Larissa Pacheco. Oh, and did I mention she's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist in judo? She has noteworthy grappling skills, and her judo definitely gives her an edge. Now, unfortunately, with Kayla Harrison making her debut in the UFC, I wasn't able to run these two through the prediction models. However, the odds probability is giving Kayla Harrison a very confident 79% probability of victory. I don't know if I'm that confident on whether or not she's going to win, but I do see it going her way. Again, she's a 2-time gold medalist in judo. She'll probably have the size and strength advantage coming into this fight, which could help her impose her grappling game and control clinch exchanges. Not to mention Holm has lost via submission before. She'll probably close the distance and drag the fight to the ground, where she knows Holm isn't comfortable. Plus, she's younger and she's more active. We're talking about 9 years of an age difference in the sport of MMA. If I haven't given you enough reasons yet, she's also been more active in the last few years, which not only helps with her experience, but helps with her conditioning. Now, of course, I do respect Holm. She's the former UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion, and if she keeps the fight standing, she could have an advantage here. Also, you have to think the significant weight cut to 135 pounds could hurt Harrison's strength and cardio a little bit. But bottom line, Harrison gets it done. She'll control the fight, she'll attempt submissions, but Holm will probably hang in there, and this will go to the distance for a unanimous decision victory in favor of Harrison. In the next fight, we have Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling. Let's take a look at their stats. Calvin Kattar stands at 71 inches tall, which is 5 feet 11 inches, and has a reach of 72 inches. His opponent, Aljamain Sterling, is 4 inches shorter at 5 feet 7 inches tall with a similar reach of 71 inches. Kattar is slightly older at 36 years old compared to Sterling, who's 34 years old. Kattar's striking is high volume with 5.12 significant strikes landed per minute, but Sterling's not far behind with 4.73. Sterling, however, has better accuracy at 52% to Kattar's low 39%. Defensively, Sterling absorbs much fewer significant strikes per minute at 2.41, which is credited to his fight plan, and he also has a better striking defense at 58% compared to Kattar's 54%. In the grappling department, Kattar attempts fewer takedowns on average with a .42 takedown average, but with a higher takedown accuracy at 29%. Sterling has a much higher takedown average at 1.97 and a lower takedown accuracy of 24%. Now, interestingly, Kattar has an impressive takedown defense at 91%, far exceeding Sterling's 45%. Submission attempts are low for both of these guys, but Sterling has a slightly higher average at 0.8 compared to Kattar at 0.1. Now let's check out how Calvin Kattar has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Kattar is coming off of back-to-back losses from Arnold Allen and Josh Emmett by KO/TKO and split decision respectively. Now prior to that, he defeated Giga Chikadze by unanimous decision after losing to Max Holloway via unanimous decision. He also has wins over Dan 50K Ige and Jeremy Stevens, and losses to Zabit Magomed Sharipov and Renato Moicano. His total record is 23 wins and 7 losses, with 11 victories coming via KO/TKO and 2 coming via submission. He's been finished twice out of his 7 losses, once via KO/TKO and once via submission. He's ranked number 8 in the featherweight division, and he's a headhunter when it comes to striking, and he also has 10 first-round finishes. Now let's check out how Aljamain Sterling has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Sterling is coming off of a huge loss to Sean O'Malley at UFC 292, where he was KO/TKO'd. Now, prior to that loss, he won 9 fights in a row where he defeated the likes of Corey Sandhagen, Peter Yan twice, although one was due to a DQ, which I'm sure you all know about, and TJ Dillashaw and Henry Cejudo. His resume is very stacked, and he's defeated some of the best fighters. His total record is 23 wins and only 4 losses, with 3 wins coming via KO/TKO and 8 wins coming via submission. He's been finished twice out of his 4 losses, both of which were via KO/TKO. He's not ranked in the featherweight division, but he's ranked 2 in the bantamweight division. He's also number 15 on the pound-for-pound rankings. There's also some other things I wanted to mention. He has the most consecutive bantamweight title defenses in UFC history, with 3 in a row, and he has 4 first-round finishes. And lastly, he's a 2-time Division III All-American wrestler who had 87 wins and 27 losses in his college wrestling record. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 6 out of 7 prediction models lean towards Aljamain Sterling. The only model that favors Calvin Kattar is the gradient boosting model, and it only gives him a 51% probability. Now when you weigh the models together, we're left with Aljamain Sterling having a 71% probability of victory against Calvin Kattar. For my final prediction, I knocked that down to a 62% probability because of Kattar's 4-inch height advantage, his slight reach advantage, his higher volume, and his takedown accuracy and defense. He's a pretty good boxer and striker. He'll have to use his footwork to keep the fight at range, piecing up Aljo on the feet. He also has decent cardio, but at the end of the day, Aljamain Sterling will win this fight by decision and wear Kattar down. He'll close the distance, secure takedowns, and implement his ground game, which will neutralize Kattar's striking. This one will go to the judges, as I don't think Aljo can finish Kattar. In the next fight, we have Jiri Prochazka versus Aleksandar Rakic. Let's take a look at their stats. Jiri Prochazka stands at 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 80 inches. At 31 years old, his significant strikes landed per minute is impressive at 5.31, with a striking accuracy of 55%. However, he absorbs a high number of strikes at 5.17 per minute, and his striking defense is 40%. He has a low takedown average of 0.61 at a 50% accuracy and defends takedowns 68% of the time. His submission average is low at 0.3. Now on the other hand, we have Aleksandar Rakic, who is an inch taller at 6 feet 4 inches. He's a year older, but he has a 2-inch reach disadvantage at 78 inches. Rakic lands fewer significant strikes per minute at 4.01, with lower accuracy of 50%. His striking defense is higher though at 53%, and he only absorbs 2.3 strikes per minute, which is less than half of Jiri. Rakic also has better grappling stats, as his takedown average is slightly higher at 0.82, although at a less accurate 25%, but he sports a high takedown defense at 90%, and his submission average is nearly non-existent. Now let's check out how Jiri Prochazka has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Jiri Prochazka went on a crazy win streak, winning 14 fights in a row since 2015. His total record is 29 wins, only 4 losses, and 1 draw, with an insane 25 of his wins coming via KO/TKO. That's an 86% KO/TKO rate. 3 of his wins were via submission, which means that he's finished 28 out of 29 of his victories, or in other terms, 97% of his fights he's finished. I mean, that's insane. He's defeated the likes of former champion Glover Teixeira, Dominic Reyes, Volkan Ozdemir, and several other high-level fighters at Rizin Fighting Federation as well. He's ranked number 2 in the light heavyweight division, and 82% of his strikes are aimed at his opponent's head. And he has a whopping 23 first-round finishes. And if you didn't catch that, that means 23 out of his 28 finishes were in the first round. Now let's check out how his opponent, Aleksandar Rakic, has performed in his most recent fights. Aleksandar Rakic has a similar story, as he went on a 12-fight win streak which ended as a result of a loss to Volkan Ozdemir, and that was back in December 2019. He then defeated Anthony Smith and Thiago Santos via unanimous decisions, and most recently he lost to Jan Blachowicz via KO/TKO in May 2022. His total record is an impressive 14 wins and only 3 losses, and 9 of his wins are via KO/TKO, and only 1 of his wins is via submission. He's been finished twice out of his 3 losses, once by KO/TKO and once by submission. He's ranked number 5 in the light heavyweight division. He has a far more balanced approach than Jiri does, and he takes the fight to the ground, he damages his opponent's legs and body as well, instead of just headhunting. Not to take any credit away from Jiri, clearly he knows what he's doing and it works way more than it doesn't. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. As much as this saddens me to say, 5 of the 7 models lean towards Aleksandar Rakic, and the reason I say that is because I'm a Jiri Prochazka fan. Now when we weigh all of the models together, Aleksandar Rakic is left with a narrow 55% probability of victory. If I had to pick based on emotion or who I want to win, I would pick Jiri Prochazka. I like his mentality, his aura, the respect, discipline, and attention that he brings to MMA. He's a complete samurai. But this video is more about logic. I did knock down the probability percentage in my final prediction though, and gave Rakic only a 53% probability of victory because Jiri is very talented, and I think his loss to Alex Pereira has brought a side out of him that's even more improved and cautious, perhaps more technical. If you've seen his fighting style, he's very unusual, but in a good way. He keeps a wide stance, his arms are low, and his punches aren't predictable at all, but they do a crazy amount of damage. Knowing what his psychology is about fighting in MMA and how he takes it as an art, which he always forever continues to work on and improve himself, I know he's going to bring his A game and he's fully capable of winning this fight. I'll probably also include him in my promising underdog videos as a value bet. Anyways, I think Rakic gets it done. I think he can deny Prochazka's power shots. I think he can stuff his takedown attempts, outwork him with volume boxing, and keep his range. Stat-wise, they're honestly both just about the same, so I don't think there's a statistical edge that we can really go off of here, just intuition backed by fighting styles, research, and film watching. Next fight, we oddly have Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage. Let's go ahead and take a look at their stats. Bo Nickal stands at 6 feet 1 inch tall with a 76-inch reach. At 28 years old, he displays a relatively low significant strikes landed per minute rate of 2.76, but compensates with a notable striking accuracy of 62%. Notably, his strikes absorbed per minute rate is at a mere 0.55 with a striking defense of 75%. Take a second to understand just how dominant that is. His grappling stats are outstanding and what he's known for, with a takedown average of 11.04, a 50% takedown accuracy, and a commendable submission average of 13.8. Now on the other side, Cody Brundage measures 6 feet tall with a 4-inch shorter reach of 72 inches. At 29 years old, Brundage has higher strikes landed per minute rate of 1.8 and a striking accuracy just below Nickal's at 55%. His strikes absorbed per minute rate is 2.51 and he has a striking defense of 43%. His grappling game seems active with a takedown average of 2.69 and a higher takedown accuracy of 52%. And he has a takedown defense of 73%. I think we can all tell where this fight's going to go, though. Now let's talk about Bo Nickal's fight history. Prior to these fights that I've displayed, he was a 3-time NCAA champion, the Hodge Trophy winner, Big Ten Athlete of the Year, U23 World Champion, and he's a BJJ Blue Belt. He's been on a 5-fight win streak, defeating the likes of Val Woodburn, Jamie Pickett, Donovan Beard, Zachary Borrego, and John Noland, all with finishes. He submitted 3 of his 5 opponents, and he's KO/TKO'd the other 2. His total record is 5 wins and 0 losses. Now let's check out how his opponent, Cody Brundage, has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Cody Brundage has a mixed total record of 10 wins and 5 losses. This is honestly a very lopsided fight. 5 of his 10 wins were via KO/TKO, and 3 of his 10 wins were via submission. He's coming off of 2 wins, one against Zachary Reese and the other against Jacob Malkoun, who we recently saw fight. He lost 3 fights in a row prior to that, losing to Cedric Dumas, Rodolfo Vieira, and Michael Olejniczak. And although he has 6 first-round finishes, he's been 5-4 since his Dana White Contender Series appearance. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. All 7 prediction models, to no surprise, point towards Bo Nickal to win. The weighted prediction comes out to 70% in favor of Nickal. My final prediction goes beyond the weighted average. I'm giving Nickal a confident 84% probability of victory. Needless to say, Nickal will submit Brundage in this fight in round 1 or 2, and that'll be the end of that. In the next fight, we have Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. Let's take a look at their stats. Charles Oliveira stands 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 74 inches. At 34 years old, he has a significant strikes landed per minute rate of 3.54 and a striking accuracy of 53%. His defensive statistics show a strikes absorbed per minute rate of 3.19 and a striking defense of 51%. In the grappling department, Oliveira boasts a takedown average of 2.32 with a takedown accuracy of 40% and an average takedown defense of 55%. His submission average is 2.7 and it's one of his strengths. Arman Tsarukyan, at 5 feet 7 inches tall with a 72-inch reach, is slightly shorter and has a slight reach disadvantage. The 27-year-old Tsarukyan has higher strikes landed per minute rate of 3.85 and a slightly lower striking accuracy of 48%. Tsarukyan absorbs fewer strikes with a strikes absorbed per minute rate of 1.91 and has a higher strike defense of 54%. His grappling stats show a higher takedown average of 3.4, a lower takedown accuracy of 36%, but an impressive takedown defense of 75% with no submission average. Now let's check out how Charles Oliveira has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Starting in 2018, Charles Oliveira went on an 11-fight win streak, which ended with his loss to Islam Makhachev in October 2022. He finished all 11 of those fights except for one, which was against Tony Ferguson and was via unanimous decision. He became champion in 2021 when he defeated Michael Chandler in May 2021 via KO/TKO. His total record stands at an impressive 34 wins and 9 losses, most of which were early on in his career. If you look at his career since 2018, he's 12 wins and only 1 loss against some of the best in the division, including Beneil Dariush, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, a 2020 Tony Ferguson, a 2020 Kevin Lee, Jared Gordon, a 2018 Jim Miller, and a 2018 Christos Giagos, and lastly, a 2018 Clay Guida. 21 of his 34 wins are from submission. 10 of his 34 wins are from KO/TKOs. That means 31 out of 34 of his victories have been finished at an impressive 91% finishing rate. He's ranked number 1 in the men's lightweight division, right underneath the champion Islam Makhachev. In fact, they were supposed to have a rematch, but it didn't end up happening, and we got a short-notice Alexander Volkanovski fight, which started the downfall of Volk. But anyways, Oliveira has 15 fights in the lightweight division after having 11 fights in the featherweight division. He has most submissions in UFC history with 16, and he also has most finishes in UFC history with 20. Now let's check out how his opponent, Arman Tsarukyan, has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Arman Tsarukyan has an impressive record of 21 wins and 3 losses. His most recent loss was a unanimous decision loss to Mateusz Gamrot in June 2022, and prior to that he lost to Islam Makhachev in 2019. And then his third loss, which is almost irrelevant, was to Alexander Bielik back in 2015. And so since then, he's defeated the likes of Matt Frevola, Christos Giagos, Joel Alvarez, Damir Ismagulov, Joaquim Silva, and Beneil Dariush. 9 of his 21 wins were via KO/TKO, and 5 of his 21 wins were via submission. He's a balanced fighter. He can finish opponents on the mat, standing up, or he can go the distance. He's ranked number 4 in the men's lightweight division, and he has 8 first-round finishes. He's also won 8 of his last 9 fights and his last 3 fights in a row. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 3 prediction models lean towards Charles Oliveira, and 4 lean towards Arman Tsarukyan. Look at what we get when we weigh the models together. We get a 50-50 split with hundredths of a decimal deciding the fight, and leaning ever so slightly in Tsarukyan's favor. I hate to say it, but I added some more confidence to that, and my final prediction is that I'm giving Arman Tsarukyan a 58% probability of victory. And I'll tell you why. His striking is impressive. 3 of his last 5 fights were finished by KO/TKO. He defeated Dariush within just 64 seconds. He's 7 years younger than Oliveira, and his grappling defense could keep him from getting into trouble. Oliveira is a submission threat off of his back, but Tsarukyan might be able to neutralize that by maintaining top position. I think Tsarukyan will start this fight off aggressively and honestly look for a round 1 KO/TKO and try to overwhelm Oliveira. I think that the longer this fight goes, the better chance Oliveira will have at victory. Oliveira deserves respect for what he's done in MMA and what he continues to do. He's fully capable of winning this fight. I don't doubt that he can win 4 or 5 times if these guys go at it like 10 times. In fact, I'll likely mention him in my Promising Underdogs video as well. There's obvious value in picking him here as the underdog, but if I'm just speaking out of logic, Tsarukyan should get it done here with his aggressive striking and his momentum early on. In the next fight, we have Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. Let's dive into the stats for these 2 fighters. Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway both stand at 5 feet 9 inches tall. Gaethje is slightly older at 35 compared to Holloway, who's 32, and they have similar reaches, with Gaethje at 70 inches and Holloway just an inch shy at 69. Gaethje shines with a significant strikes per minute rate at 7.35, edging out Holloway's 7.17. Both of these fighters are high-volume strikers, but Gaethje is a brawler, and Holloway tends to be more on the technical side, landing quicker, lighter shots that still deal damage and wear opponents down. Gaethje also has a higher striking accuracy at 60% over Holloway's 47%. However, Holloway takes the lead in striking defense, sitting at 59% to Gaethje's 53%. When it comes to grappling, Gaethje shows lower averages in takedowns, but boasts a substantial takedown defense at 75%. If you thought that's good, Holloway has an 84% takedown defense. Holloway tends to struggle with smaller opponents generally because they're able to get into his longer reach and strike from close range, whereas he's kind of tall and rangy. Examples of that are Dustin Poirier and Alexander Volkanovski. But that's where this fight is kind of interesting and different. They're both the same height, so we get to see maybe classic Holloway come back if he doesn't get caught with a hard shot, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So first, let's check out how Justin Gaethje has performed in his most recent UFC fights. Justin Gaethje has an impressive record of 25 wins and 4 losses, especially considering his fighting style. Usually aggressive fighters like him, who like to brawl, tend to have more losses. He has an insane chin. It's hard to drop or wobble Gaethje. In fact, only 2 guys were able to do it, and that was Dustin Poirier in 2018, which is understandable, and Eddie Alvarez back in 2017. 20 of his 25 victories come from KO/TKO, and 1 has come from submission. Only 4 of his victories have ever gone the distance. He's been KO/TKO'd twice, like we discussed, and he's been submitted twice. He's coming off of a win against Dustin Poirier at UFC 291 back in July 2023, and prior to that, he defeated the likes of Rafael Fiziev, Michael Chandler, a 2020 Tony Ferguson, a 2019 Cowboy Donald Cerrone, a 2019 Edson Barboza, James Vick, and lastly, a 2017 Michael Johnson. His recent losses were to Charles Oliveira, where he was submitted, and Khabib Nurmagomedov, where he was also submitted. He's ranked number 2 in the lightweight division, right under Charles Oliveira. He has 9 first-round finishes and has won 7 of his last 9 fights. He's also won 2 fights in a row now. Now let's check out Max Holloway's fight history. Starting in 2014, Holloway went on a 13-fight win streak. He has a spectacular resume. He's defeated the likes of a 2015 Cub Swanson, a 2015 Charles Oliveira, 2015 Jeremy Stevens, a 2016 Anthony Showtime Pettis, Jose Aldo twice in 2017, Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar, Calvin Kattar, Yair Rodriguez, Arnold Allen, and recently Chan Sung Jung, aka the Korean Zombie. I did a data analysis on this division and looked at how a neural network model compared the top-ranked fighters, and Holloway's bar was far ahead of anyone else's, and we could tell why. His total record is 25 wins and 7 losses, but one of the key things to consider is that 4 of his career losses actually came within the last 5 years, so that might be kind of telling as to where he's at in his career. He's lost to Alexander Volkanovski 3 times and Dustin Poirier. Now remember what I said earlier, how he struggles with shorter fighters that can get within range, so maybe we can write these losses off against an opponent like Gaethje, but I'm sure it still has an impact on his overall confidence, and it hurts his momentum a little bit. In his last 10 fights, he's 6 wins and 4 losses, so maybe that helps put things into perspective. Now, I will say he was unbeaten when he was fighting at 145 pounds between 2014 and 2019, which is at a different weight class, but it's still impressive. And he's won 4 of his last 5 fights and 2 in a row, so maybe this is a comeback stretch late in his career. So now let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 6 out of 7 prediction models lean towards Max Blessed Holloway, and when you weigh them together, they give him a 66% probability of victory. But the models are likely being influenced by the insane volume that Holloway has put on fighters in the past. But he'll have to be far more cautious against a fighter like Gaethje. Gaethje has overwhelming striking power, pressure, and pace. He tends to hurt fighters before they can get into their rhythm and figure things out. And he can be a bit spontaneous at times too. He also does have a wrestling background, and he is a grappling threat, which could kind of disrupt Holloway's timing and open up some strikes. And for those reasons, along with his 1-inch reach advantage, more strikes landed per minute, and a 13% better striking accuracy, I'm giving Justin Gaethje a 55% probability of victory and going against the prediction models for this one. I predict Gaethje will be aggressive and get the KO/TKO in this fight. In the next fight, we have our co-main event with champion Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan. Let's go ahead and take a look at their stats. Zhang stands at 5 feet 4 inches tall, and Yan is an inch taller at 5 feet 5 inches, although they share the same reach of 63 inches, and both are 34 years of age. Zhang shows a higher significant strikes landed per minute at 5.94 compared to Yan's 5.55, indicating a slightly more aggressive approach in her fights. Yan also has a lower striking accuracy of 44%, compared to Weili's 51%. Yan also absorbs more strikes per minute at 3.56, however she has an 8% better striking defense at 61%. On the ground, Zhang has a higher takedown average of 2.29 with a takedown accuracy of 42%. On the other hand, Yan has a 0.86 takedown average with a higher takedown accuracy and defense at 66% and 70% respectively. Submissions are negligible with these two fighters, however Weili does have an average of 0.4. Now let's look at Zhang Weili's fight history. If you thought the previous fighters had an impressive win streak on their card, Weili will blow you away. She went on a whopping 21-fight win streak, which started back in 2014 and lasted all the way to 2021, where she was finally defeated by Rose Namajunas twice. So prior to facing Namajunas, her only loss was all the way back in 2013. Those 3 total losses are the only losses she's faced in her career. And so her total record is an impressive 24 wins and 3 losses. And 11 of her 24 wins were via KO/TKO and 8 were via submission. She's the women's strawweight division champion and is ranked number 2 in the pound-for-pound rankings. She has 11 first-round finishes, and she's the first Chinese fighter to win a UFC title. She also has won 24 of her last 26 fights and 3 in a row, defeating Amanda Lemos, Carla Esparza, and Joanna Jacek. Prior to those fights, she defeated Joanna Jacek again and Jessica Andrade. Now let's check out how her opponent, Yan Xiaonan, has performed in her most recent UFC fights. Yan's total record is 18 wins and 3 losses, 8 of which were wins via KO/TKO and 1 of which was via submission. She's recently coming off of a 2-fight win streak against Jessica Andrade and Mackenzie Dern. Prior to those, she was defeated via split decision by Marina Rodriguez, and she was KO/TKO'd by Carla Esparza in 2021. She also defeated Angela Hill back in 2019. Now she's currently ranked number 1 in the women's strawweight division and is number 10 in the pound-for-pound rankings. And lastly, she has 8 first-round finishes. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. This one's pretty obvious. 7 out of 7 prediction models lean towards Zhang Weili. The 1,000 fight simulation actually gives her a 98% probability of victory, which is incredibly high. When we weigh the models together to get a balanced view, Zhang Weili has a 62% probability of victory. Now I bumped that up 10% and gave her a final probability of 72% due to her powerful and technical striking ability that comes from her traditional martial arts background, also her relentless pressure, her mental fortitude, and a well-rounded skill set. So let me give you a little bit more background. She spent her childhood studying at a martial arts academy, which gave her a very strong foundation. She also trained with Shaolin monks, which sculpted her mental toughness. I don't think she'll be able to finish Yan here, but I can definitely see her wearing her down and earning a unanimous decision victory. In the next fight, we have our main event, Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. Let's go ahead and take a look at their stats. They both have identical heights at 6 feet 4 inches tall, and they both have 79-inch reaches. Pereira is 4 years older at 36 years old, whereas Jamal Hill is 32. Pereira's significant strikes landed per minute rate stands at an impressive 5 with a deadly 62% accuracy, considering the power that comes with each of his strikes. Hill has a higher strikes landed per minute rate at 7.31, but he throws 8% less accurately at a 54% striking accuracy. Both fighters absorb about the same number of strikes, with Alex Pereira absorbing 3.65, while Jamal Hill absorbs a bit less at 3.35. Pereira's striking defense is even at 50%, with Hill's just a notch below at 47%. As far as their ground game goes, Alex Pereira defends 70% of his takedowns, and he has a .19 takedown average and a .4 submission average. He rarely utilizes takedowns or submissions, since he really has a background in kickboxing. Jamal Hill doesn't have a takedown average or a submission average, but he does have a 73% takedown defense. Clearly, both of these guys like to keep the fight standing. Now let's review Alex Pereira's fight history. First, let's start with his kickboxing record. He had 33 wins and 7 losses, and 21 of his wins were via knockout. He holds 2 kickboxing wins over former champion Israel Adesanya. In MMA, his record is 9 wins and 2 losses, with 7 wins coming from KO/TKO, and his 2 losses were a KO/TKO, which was by Israel Adesanya in April 2023, and the other loss was a submission, which was at his MMA debut in Jungle Fight all the way back in 2015. Since then, he's defeated Bruno Silva, Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya prior to losing to him, Jan Blachowicz, and recently Jiri Prochazka, which was one of my favorite fights. He has 3 first-round finishes, he's the light heavyweight division champion, he's ranked number 4 on the pound-for-pound rankings, and his striking stats show a good balance between an opponent's head, body, and legs. He was Glory Kickboxing's simultaneous middleweight and light heavyweight champion, and he defended his middleweight belt 5 times. He started training back in 2009 to have a better quality of life and get away from alcohol. He also has a kickboxing black belt, he's disciplined, powerful, and a very dangerous opponent. Now let's break down Jamal Hill's fighting history. Jamal Hill has a total record of 12 wins and only 1 loss, with 7 wins coming via KO/TKO. His loss was back in 2021 to Paul Craig, where he was KO/TKO'd. However, aside from that, he's defeated the likes of Ovince St. Preux, Jimmy Crute, Johnny Walker, Thiago Santos, and recently Glover Teixeira. Let me tell you guys a little bit more about him. He's ranked number 1 in the light heavyweight division, right under Alex Pereira. He has 4 first-round finishes, and he's on a 4-fight winning streak. He also has had 2 amateur titles and 1 professional title, and he's a blue belt in Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a brown belt in MMA trick striking system. Let's review who the prediction models picked to win this fight, the weighted results, and my final prediction. 6 out of 7 prediction models picked Jamal Hill, with only 1 prediction model giving Alex Pereira the advantage and an 82% probability of victory. The models are picking up on Hill's pressure and pace, his durability and his chin, and the fact that he can defend leg kicks, which might negate Pereira's ability to leverage those. Jamahal Hill can utilize those advantages and try to look for an early KO/TKO against Pereira. I wish I could feed Alex Pereira's kickboxing record to these prediction models because they'd probably counter this prediction by understanding his striking skill and his knockout power. But most importantly, I think we have to give Alex Pereira credit for his fight IQ. He has a keen understanding of the striking game, and he knows how to intelligently feint, create angles, and read his opponents. And since he's been working with former champ Glover Teixeira, he's improved his ability to neutralize his opponent's styles. He's a strategic fighter. For example, in his fight against Jiri Prochazka, he implemented a game plan of chopping his lead leg to compromise his movement, and it worked perfectly. He still has room for growth, but if you see him fight, you can see how truly strong and dominant he performs. I'm not counting Hill out and saying that he doesn't have some solid probability of victory, but he can be a bit sloppy and wild sometimes. Plus, let's not forget, he suffered a ruptured Achilles tendon while playing basketball during UFC 290's fight week, where he had to vacate the UFC title. So there's a chance that he might be rushing to get back a bit. I feel like his camp might be focused more on him making weight and not getting injured again than actually preparing for the fight. So with all of those things considered, I went the opposite direction of the prediction models here, and I'm giving Alex Pereira a conservative 53% probability of victory, which gives Jamahal Hill a 47% probability. I see him finishing this fight and knocking Hill out. Regardless of who you think will win, we can agree on one thing. This fight will not go the distance. And with that, those are all of the fights for the Instant Classic UFC 300 card featuring Pereira versus Hill. This card features insanely high talented fighters, and it's one of the most stacked cards I've ever seen, if not the most stacked card of all time. So I hope you all enjoy and all of your bets hit. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all. Running this data and analysis, the prediction models, and charts and graphs takes hours every day and week, so I'd really appreciate the support. Please check out the Patreon if you'd like to support me through there. See you all in the next one.